Hey guys, welcome back to Real Housewives Recaps. I'm so glad you're here. You guys, I started a new book today. Which one did I start? You pick. No, teasing. Let me explain. First of all, I'm Jen. Thanks for being here. You know, I love deep diving these books, and we got a new one. Now, if you're in the US, you probably are reading the one on the left. And if you're in the UK or other parts of the world, you're probably reading the one on the right. Why did they do it like this? I have less than no idea. I tried to Google it. I tried to get the inside story. I couldn't find it. This is Robert Hardman. He wrote the book. It says he has followed the royal family. He's written about them for more than 20 years. He wrote for Daily Mail, just a lot of stuff. Okay. Well, I went on a deep dive to find out what's up with this book. Never could get the real answer as to why there were two versions of the book, but I do know that's a thing that happens. And I found this tweet here where he basically explains, yep, exact same book, exact same everything, different name and cover. So if you hear me call this book The Making of a King or refer to it or I show this picture on the left, it's because that's the book I technically have. But I know the book on the right is the one that keeps being flashed by Daily Mail. It's confusing. I'm not trying to make it more confusing. Either way, same book. I'm reading it. And I got to tell you, I'm loving it. So I'm going to dive into this. I'm going to do a recap on it. There's some parts that I'm really going to dive into. There's some parts that we're going to skim over. This book has like almost 500 pages in it. But I got to tell you, as I flash random pictures of King Charles in the background, we're going to talk about it. I got to tell you, I am on chapter 3 and I'm loving the book. I am. It's so well written. It's so entertaining. Again, it's kind of flying by for me. I honestly had planned to kind of skim it and then really hit hard on the, Harry and Meghan of it all. I'm finding myself completely sucked into this book. I really am enjoying it. And again, I had planned to just kind of skim some of the parts and then really dive into the Harry and Meghan stuff, but I find the way this author writes very easy to read and enjoyable. And I've been very honest about my feelings, about King Charles. He's fine. I respect his position and, all that. But I really don't know much about him. I'm huge into, of course, Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, that sort of thing, So while I respect his position, without being at all horrible or disrespectful or going there, you know where I'm going with this, I look forward to the day where William is king. So I've made no secret of that. But I will say, this book is making me like Charles a little bit more. I'm enjoying this book very much. I'm surprised at how much I enjoyed this book because, again, I don't dislike King Charles. I just wouldn't say that I'm the biggest fan. I just, whatever. But he did wave to me at Coronation, so I assume we're best friends. So there's that. But anyway, all that said, I can't say enough. I really like this book. So we're going to go through it. I'm going to go chapter by chapter. Some I'm really going to dive into and some we'll kind of just talk about in general. You know how it goes. If it gets boring, we'll move on. If it's interesting, we'll stick with it. So, So again, I'm calling it The Making of a King. I understand that there's another name, so don't be confused by it. Again, according to the author's own words, it's the same book. So yay for that. Now let's jump in. All right. So we have the introduction. Again, this thing is like 500 pages. I'm waiting for my hard copy. I like the hard copy so I can I like to have it in my hand. I like to highlight and all that. I don't know what's up with it. I've had other people say the same thing. You're dying to read this book, whichever version of the book, and you can't get a copy of it. And I don't know what's going on with that. I can't either. Jay is my Amazon guy. I'm like, hey, give me this book. He looked and he's like, yeah, they're not shipping. He thinks that they're actually sold out. He thinks it's selling well, but who knows? Who cares? I got mine on Kindle. You can find it there if you do that. I believe it's also on Audible. But yeah, let's get into this book. So it starts out with the introduction, and I'm just going to kind of skim over this. P.S. That's what I was going to say. The parts of this book that I am loving, we keep getting these little glimpses into Her Majesty the late Queen, and I love that. I found out a little bit of information I didn't know about her. We get personal information about King Charles, which I kind of enjoying. I'll go into it. I actually really enjoyed the chapter on Camilla because, again, same. I respect her position. I can't say that I'm, truly been a fan, but everybody says she's lovely, and this book really goes into it. And I just randomly have pictures in the background. I look up and I see Diana. It's no disrespect to Diana, I'm not trying to start a war, but I'm just telling you, I really enjoyed the chapter about her, and I'm excited to talk about that too. And I'll tell you this, I haven't, I'm in chapter 3, we haven't really gone hard into the Harry and Meghan stuff. I'm excited to do that. I know it's coming. But the little glimpses we get, this author's not a fan. Robert Hardman is the author's name. I got to remember that. I keep calling him the author. Robert Hardman is not a fan. And that's what initially drew my attention to this book. They were flashing glimpses of this book or previews or whatever you want to call it in Daily Mail. And I was like, oh, hey, he's calling out. Remember, he's the one that we already knew about Lily and that whole name thing, but he's the one that reignited this on Daily Mail, and I thank him for that. I'm glad people are finally seeing what awful people Harry and Meghan are. All right, let's get into this. So we start out with the introduction, and the highlight here, let's see, it's all about, he explains that this isn't a full biography on I understand he's King Charles. People get frustrated with me because I call him Charles. You know who I'm talking about. It's more of a lazy way to speak than anything else. I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I'm officially saying King Charles, but if I call him Charles, you know who I mean. All right. So it basically he says, okay, this is going to be a biography, but it's not a full biography. So he kind of gives highlights of Charles growing up and stuff, but we don't get every detail that some of us know and some of us, may not, just not the tedious stuff that some authors like to pad their books with. How about that? But the book itself begins with Charles taking over. Her Majesty, the late Queen, has passed, and just kind of going into that. Now, he points out, interesting, right off the bat, Charles is the age that Her Majesty the late Queen was. Let's see. When he took over, it was almost her golden jubilee. So that's just kind of interesting to think about, is Charles's age. And I'm not age shaming or whatever. He's, it's coming for all of us. But it's just interesting when I stop and think about it like that. Like, wow, she had been in power for a very long time. And Charles just assumed power. So I think, honestly, that's why I say no disrespect to Charles. It's just that I do look forward to when Prince William becomes king, Again, maybe in my scenario, I don't mean anything bad happens to Charles. I just mean he hands it over, like Denmark, right? All right. Chapter 1. Right off the bat, what got my attention with Chapter 1 is he called it Sea Rex. And I was like, what's Sea Rex? I'm on board. What is this? Well, to skip ahead, we find out that the chapter is called Sea Rex because they don't know what to get Charles for Christmas and for different gifting occasions. As what do you get somebody like that has it all? And I've heard the stories that the royal family just kind of get silly little gifts for each other. So for Charles, they got him a bunch of ties. They didn't say who exactly. They just said family got him a bunch of ties. One of his favorites. Let me see if I can find a picture. Here it is. This is why this chapter is called Sea Rex, because they got him this tie with little T-Rexes all over it, and he loves it, and he loves to wear it, and he's often seen wearing it. And I kind of love knowing that detail. All right. So it picks up with him age 73, a few months from his coronation. And they talk about how hard it was for him to assume this role. Her late Majesty, the Queen, she was more accepted during the time, it sounds like. And now what that means is her role was more accepted at the time. And now it's more about reminding of the merits of monarchy, is where he's going with that. Okay. So then he's quick to point out that the polls actually prefer King Charles, and that, but then he goes into, well, William doesn't want that yet. He doesn't want to displace his father. Charles was very reluctant to discuss the future when Her Majesty, the late Queen, was still alive. And they say it's because he loved her so much and he didn't want to tempt fate. The author goes into, now I never watched The Crown, but he says it's basically, I'm paraphrasing here, it's kind of not fair how the Crown portrays him and other things portray him as desperate for the throne. And, I love this picture so much. When I was searching up pictures, I found this one and I loved it. Okay. But they say it's kind of not fair how he's portrayed as having wanted the throne, and basically explaining that he loved his mother so much he never would have tempted fate, so much so that he wouldn't even talk about the future when the Queen was still alive. So they really didn't have huge plans in place. I'm sure the men in gray suits and the courtiers and all that did, but the king himself, the now king, did not have plans in place because he didn't want to talk about it. And that kind of made me respect him a little bit more. They said that the era of the corgi ended with her, and now the Jack Russell era has begun. He pledges to, or when he, became king, he pledged to follow his mother's, quote, unswerving devotion to duty. And, okay, so then we get our very first mention of doofus and doofess. All right, so it's page 10 for me. If you're reading the other copy, it'll be around page 10. They said they're the exact same, so it's probably page 10. All right, so the first mention comes at in the third paragraph on this page. The departure of, I won't say their titles, from royal life in 2020 and their subsequent sensational attacks on the institution on camera and in print have hurt. And then it goes on to say a quote that says, of course, the king is extremely sad about Harry and Meghan, but there's a sense of exasperation that he's done what he can do, and now he is king. There are many more things to think about, says one friend. He's tried listening. Now he just says, I don't know what the problem is. I'm just getting on with my life. So again, I really like this author. This is gentle, believe me. It gets more interesting, more into this stuff. And I'm only on chapter 3, but that is the first mention of those two. And we'll get into more in just a few minutes. All right. So from there, we go into a little bit of history of Charles. I'm going to breeze past this, including his growing up, his university. And again, the author did a good job of giving details without going through every single solitary. You know how that goes sometimes when you read these biographies. It's just like, oh my goodness, can we please get through this part? Anyway, but it's about his growing up, university, Royal Navy, his marriage to Diana, marriage to Camilla, what he's dealt with Andrew, how the royal family got through COVID. It sounds like I'm breezing past big parts. I'm really not. These are just tidbits he dropped in there before getting to more juicy stuff. So, the first time Charles stood in for the Her Majesty the late Queen and her declining health. I really enjoyed this part. It was around page 19, and he's obviously a huge fan of her. I'm saying he, talking about the author, a huge fan of Her Majesty the late Queen, as am I. He goes really into detail about how hardworking she was, and not just doing the engagements, the paperwork. It's something that I really didn't think about. Mountains of it. And it sounds like, according to the author, the, whatever you call them, the aides would try to help and offer to take some of that. And she's like, no, I got it. I got this. She's amazing. And I love hearing details like that. I really do. And speaking of details, let me read you this anecdote about the Queen because I love it. It made my heart happy. This was on page 19, and I really enjoyed hearing anecdotes like this about Her Majesty the late Queen. It says, the late Queen, though a busy letter writer, preferred to unwind in front of the television, especially the BBC News at 6 and dramas such as Downton Abbey. I didn't know that. I love knowing that. I love Downton Abbey. And Midsummer Murders. Didn't know that either. Not only was she heard swapping notes on the latter with fellow fan and German Chancellor Angela Merkel. But one official recalls the evening she spotted Midsummer star John Nettles at a palace reception. She went straight up to him and said, "There have been an awful lot of murders in your village." I don't know why that just cracked me up. I love hearing that. And again, I do know why. I just love glimpses into her sense of humor. It seems like she was a lot of fun. And I love hearing stuff like that. Now, the author does go in to say that Charles also very hardworking. They say that basically they kind of dance around it. And we'll go into it a little bit more in a little bit. They say he can have a temper, but when that's not triggered, they said that can be triggered over small things. But when that's not triggered, he is a hard worker. And one of his things that he really enjoys is being outside. And he now has an obsession with planting trees. I think I knew that. I thought it was more garden work. I didn't realize it was specific to planting trees, but they say it's almost an obsession at this point to go out and to plant some trees. That's one of his favorite things to do and ways to unwind. Right? And then we'll go into chapter 2, Queen Camilla. And don't worry, Harry and Meghan make an appearance in this one. We'll read that as well. But let me give you some highlights of chapter 2, Queen Camilla. All right. So I really, I do know a few things about Queen Camilla. Again, I'm going to say the same disclaimer. If I call her Camilla, no disrespect. It's more of a lazy way of speaking than anything else. I'm officially calling her Queen Camilla right here, but I'm going to probably call her Camilla from here on out. So Camilla, I really don't know as much about. I had read not too long ago, and I talked about in a video, where people really seem to like her a lot. It took a long time. We know the history there, especially for the press and stuff. But I'm saying the people that have been around her and in her company really seem to like her and like her personality. And this author is no exception. Sounds like he interviewed a bunch of the household staff, past and present and stuff. And they said that the household is sunnier when the queen is around. And again, this is where they go into Charles and how he can be quite moody. And he can get cross over minor things. They point to that, was it the pen of it all? But again, I don't begrudge Charles that. I've talked about this because that was right after his mom passed. And who among us hasn't, just gotten upset over something trivial? It's just that we don't have cameras in our faces. And I'm not standing up for Charles. I'm sure he can be difficult and grumpy, if you will. But and that I don't fault him on the pen thing. But Queen Camilla, they say, is just very kind. And again, they call her, she makes things sunny when she's around them. They call her the strong voice of common sense. They go into many examples of this. Things like she doesn't feel the need. They gave an example with a Roald Dahl book and how people were all up in arms because in one scene he calls a character fat. And I know that word can be triggering to some, but her point was, yes, I understand why it might bother people now, but we have to understand how this is written, when this is written. It's not that big a deal. We don't need to reprint it because of that. And so many people applauded her for that. And that's a theme that keeps coming up, is with her, it seems to be about common sense. Then everybody's consensus seems to be that she changed Charles for the better. She made him a better man. I love this fact. I didn't know this. She apparently loves, so where they go into Her Majesty the Queen loved her television shows in the evenings. And then King Charles likes to plant trees. Camilla, we go into her love of reading. We'll get into that. But she also loves music, and she loves ballet as well, but she really loves music, and they cite the Rolling Stones and ABBA as some of her favorites. And then they say people were shocked because she took her grandkids to ABBA's virtual reality tour, ABBA's is a virtual reality ABBA voyage is what they called it. And they called her literally the dancing queen. They say that she's intrinsically cheerful. They tell a cute anecdote how King Charles is constantly opening windows. She goes behind him and shuts them. And when he asks her about it, she basically says, "We're freezing." Yes, I closed it. We're freezing. And he just, he kind of gets a kick out of her, and it sounds like a lot of people do. They say that she has a great twinkle, and that now I thought this was an interesting point. He goes into, of course, the history. We can't bypass that. We know the history, but he goes into the dealings with the press and how horrible they were toward her for a very long time, and how it wasn't just with the relationship, it was when Diana passed. Just awful stuff. We know. All right. Well, even through that and her treatment by the press, she's an advocate for free press. So I think that's an interesting point, because here's somebody who actually has had bad experiences with the press, and you can decide for yourself if it's warranted or not. I don't think the amount of it was warranted. I think it's, I don't think it's fair. It was a lot, it seems, if again, just coming into this. But they praise her because they say, even through all that, she still fights for free press. Now, think about that in comparison to Hank and Skank and how they deal with things. They're the complete opposite. I do not believe Harold and Fraud have been unfairly treated with the press. We've seen where they've cried that, but then they can't really come up with examples. Well, but yet they want to silence any critics, right? Well, Camilla seems to be the opposite. She has dealt with the press. Again, you decide if it's warranted or not, but it's pretty awful, it sounds. But she fights for freedom of press and that they should be allowed to print what they want to print, sort of thing. So I respect her for that, because if anybody might have a reason to not fight for that, it'd be her. The other thing, and it's unrelated to this, but it kind of is, that I think about, I did a separate video on it that's something else Meghan did. And I'm calling out Meghan specifically, but Harry was involved with the paparazzi. They claimed that she was being harassed. And yet, in my video, I encourage you to go watch it, you'll see that it was Catherine that was being harassed, not Meghan. And that Meghan allegedly would often tip off the paparazzi. That's not being harassed if you're telling them where you are, right? Just my opinion on that. But I think it's interesting because it's kind of the same thing here. They cry about, to my Harry and Meghan, about the dealings with the press, and they want to silence everybody except for themselves, who feel like they're free to make up whatever they want to make up. If anybody else talks to the press, it's like, I just think it's interesting and again, very similar in both cases, right? All right, we're going to talk about page 40. They go into Harry and Meghan again. Here we go. So they're talking about Queen Camilla's toughness, her inner toughness. They had seldom seen since her dark days in the 1990s. Here we go. Since the Sussexes' departure from the United Kingdom, Queen Camilla had found herself cast as the, quote, dangerous villain of the piece by Prince Harry. With her on the way to being queen consort, there was gonna be people or bodies left in the street, he told USA's 60 Minutes. For her part, Queen Camilla was content to let it pass. There was to be no selective briefing on the matter, no friends given the nod to voice sadness or disappointment or set the record straight. Do you see what he's doing there? He's taking digs at Meghan because those are plays out of her playbook. Instead, Queen Camilla just carried on. After nearly 2 decades as a member of the royal family, she works on the basis that the public have a pretty good idea of what they're getting. Her response to noises off from California would be business as usual, with a smile and without a word. So well said and so well done. I really am enjoying this book, and we are going to get more into the Harry and Meghan because I have the feeling it's going to get, say it with me, messy, right? And I'm here for it. Here we're picking up on chapter 3, and I'm going to, here's the author saying, hey, don't worry, it's the same book. I don't know why they did that. I know they do that with some books, something about different regions and titles. Who knows? Who cares? I'm going to forewarn you on this one. I'm enjoying the heck out of this book, so don't think it's anything but that. I love this book. I'm really enjoying the way this writer communicates things, and I really am. This part's hard. This really goes into the passing of Queen Elizabeth, and if you follow me at all or know me at all, which a lot of you do, I love Queen Elizabeth, and notice I don't say loved, I say I love her. Wonderful lady. I'm a huge fan, Her Majesty the late Queen, and I get a little sad talking about it, but we have to talk about it. This chapter is important. Now, if you're looking for the juice, it's here. We go into some Harry and Meghan stuff and their awful behavior around the time of the Queen's passing, so don't you worry, we'll get into that. If you're like, Jen, what's up with the pictures? Well, it's a book about King Charles, so a lot of these pictures, well, all these pictures have to do with King Charles, and they're in no particular order. I just like to put up different backgrounds. I feel like we get sick of looking at just Harry and Meghan stuff, so let's take a look at King Charles as this book's about him. But I would like to start off by saying I really am enjoying this book very much. I had talked about in the first episode, I'm going to say it again. It's not that I'm the biggest fan of Charles, good or bad. I respect his position. I'm much more interested in William and Catherine, Prince and Princess of Wales. I'm a huge fan of Her Majesty the late Queen. So, I'm fine with Charles. I respect him, but I'm enjoying this book very much, and it's kind of shedding a new light on him for me. So I am enjoying getting to know him, if you will, as well as Queen Camilla. But all that said, let's jump into this. I'm sending hugs. Send hugs back at me. We'll share some tea. We'll share some vodka, whatever you want to share. We'll share a pint. We'll share a cuppa. We'll get through this together, all right? Thanks so much for being here. Honk, honk, everyone. I'm Jen, if I didn't say that. Anyway, so we pick up on chapter 3, Robert Hardman's book, and it's called London Bridge. And in case you're not aware, I'm sure you are, but in case you're not, London Bridge refers to, basically, it's the plan they had for the Queen's passing. It was called Operation London Bridge, and it's the plans for the Queen's funeral. I say the Queen, you know who I mean, Her Majesty the late Queen. I understand that there's now Queen Camilla. When I'm talking about the Queen here, I mean Her Majesty the late Queen Elizabeth. And I put this preface in the last one. I'll put it here. I understand that he is King Charles. I respect his position. When I'm talking, sometimes I get a little bit more, lazy in my speech. So if I call him Charles, you know who I mean. No disrespect. I do the same with everybody else. No disrespect at all intended. But anyway, so again, when I'm saying the Queen here, I mean Her Majesty the late Queen Elizabeth. My favorite. Love her so much. Especially, even reading this, I just get teary-eyed and upset, and it's all good. It's just hard to read this stuff again because I love her so much. Anyway, all right, we can do this. Chapter 3, Queen's passing. So it involves, I'm not gonna go over every single detail because you probably know a lot of them, but in a nutshell, I'd been so focused on where William was, again, Prince of Wales, where William was, where Catherine was, things like that, and who found out when and how and who and what was going on. So I really didn't know where Charles was when he got the news. So in this chapter, the author, Robert Hardman, goes into that and explains that he was actually driving at the Balmoral estate. It sounds like he had spent the morning with Her Majesty the late Queen and had been at her bedside. And then they didn't know that this was the end. And so he had taken a break. He had gone back. I already forgot the name of it. He has a place right near Balmoral. He had gone to his place and then was driving, headed to Balmoral when he got the call. And the author goes into how Her Majesty the late Queen received her call when it was her turn to take over as queen. Her father, King George, had passed away in his sleep, and she happened to be visiting Kenya at the time. She was watching wildlife when she got the call. So it was interesting and sad to go into the history and how that occurred. So let's see here. Princess Anne, the Princess Royal, had happened to be there at Balmoral when she had business in the area, so she was staying there and visiting her mother, and she was there and made the call. It's hard to talk about. Princess Anne had made the call, basically, and let them know what was going on. All right, so before passing, Charles knew that this was the end, or assumed that this was the end. They did go into a story I didn't realize. I guess in 2021, Queen Elizabeth, Her Majesty the late Queen, had gotten very ill, and they actually thought she might pass before Christmas. I didn't know that. But she surprised everybody, and she spent a little time in bed, but then they didn't say what of. She had recovered and was back on her feet again. So they said after that she did have the mobility issues that we had kind of learned about, but she didn't really want the public to know about that. But this time, unfortunately, that was, not the case. It was the end for her. So, all right, let's move from the sadness that we all feel and get outraged, shall we? Let's talk about what happened. We've heard, if you read it, if you heard me read it, if you heard your other favorite YouTubers talk about it, we heard Harry's account of what happened in Spare. Well, Robert Hardman, the author of this book, who I'm enjoying very much, his writing styles, and I like him very much because he can't stand Harry and Meghan either. He kind of goes into this and calls them out. So let's talk about it. Let's see. If you're following along with me, I'm on page 65 of the book. And again, it's probably around that page if you're reading the other version of it. I think they're almost the same pages. I don't know if the printing was a little different size in one because I think one had like 6 more pages than the other. But again, we're assured it's the same book. So it's around that page. Page 65, if you're reading along with me, I'm just going to read this part of the book to you. And then we'll discuss. So again, this is, they had a pretty good feeling that, unfortunately, Her Majesty the Queen's health was deteriorating. And it was formerly Prince of Wales, now King Charles, that was making calls. He called William and he called Harry. So according to the book, Prince William's team immediately liaised with the offices of his 2 royal uncles. By 12:30 p.m., the Royal Air Force had arranged for an envoy to fly them from RAF Norholt to Aberdeen. Takeoff would be at 2:30 p.m. Fortuitously, those 2, I won't say their titles, Harry and Meghan, also happened to be in Britain for a few days of charity engagements. In his explosive memoir, Spare, that one says he received a call from his father warning him that the Queen's health had taken a turn. Now, he's quoting out of Harry's book at this point, and the quote says, I immediately texted Willie. He's just so rude, calling him Willie. I immediately texted Willie to ask whether he and Kate, because he can't bother to call her Catherine, he and Kate were flying up. If so, when and how? No response, writes Harry. Meg and I looked at flight options. All right, so that's out of Harry's mouth. Well, the author goes on to say, clearly Prince William did not regard this as the appropriate moment for the intensely difficult conversation he needed to have with his brother. A few weeks earlier, it had been widely reported that Prince Harry was delaying publication of his memoir until after the Queen's passing. There could be little scope for dialogue until its contents were known. The sense of reckless betrayal following those 2 interview, I won't say their titles, with Oprah Winfrey the year before, and its vague, unanswerable half claims of institutional istwords. If you're new here, I say istwords because YouTube doesn't like certain words. You know what I'm talking about. It involves race, sex, things like that, like ist. All right. And hostility towards Meghan still lingered. Quote, some of the family were probably ready to give him a piece of their mind, says one of those in the midst of this fast-moving turn of events. All right, so then he continues and says, this is the precise sort of situation where different royal teams talk to one another to get things done. Had those 2 been keen to share a flight, they could have asked their staff to contact Prince William's staff. They had all their numbers, says a senior Kensington Palace aide who is adamant that there was no call from those 2 camp that morning. Ding, ding, ding. I have always said that. I think everything they say is a lie to my Harry and Meghan. And of course, he's going to spin the story to make himself look like a victim. Let's continue. Harry and Meghan had decided to make their own travel arrangements and announced that they would be canceling their remaining engagements for the day. At which Harry writes in his stupid book Spare, he received another call from his father to say he should come on his own. We can easily imagine the dread from which the Prince of Wales, of course, at the time, that would have been Charles, approached the call. Those two, capacity for taking offense was well known. I love this writer. And everyone was conscious, I never say that word right, conscious, that any conversation could end up in public domain. So pause from reading and just my thoughts on this. We know this, but to reread it makes me ill. It makes me sick. Thinking about what everybody was going through, dealing with, at this point she hadn't yet passed, but they knew that it was most likely on the way. Dealing with that, and then have to worry about these two and what shenanigans they would pull. It really, truly disgusts me. Making it all about themselves, as per usual. All right, let's continue reading this part. I'm stalling because I lost my place. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Any conversation could end up in public domain, as indeed this one did 3 months later in his book. I love this writer. Harry says his father was, quote, nonsensical and disrespectful. I'm sorry. He is losing his mother. Does he need to be respectful for you and your precious ego and feelings and bullshit right now? I don't think so. All right, let's continue reading. As he explained that he did not want Meghan coming to Balmoral. Let's see here. And then there's a quote from Dum Dum's book that says, I wasn't having it. Don't ever speak about my wife that way, is the Duke's record of his response. At which point his father explained that he simply didn't want lots of people at the house, and that Catherine, now Princess of Wales, then Duchess of Cambridge, was not coming either. That breaks my heart. I'm pausing the reading really quick to say that breaks my heart too. I've said it before and I'll say it here. I sound like a child, but I don't care. It's not fair. It's not fair because Catherine had a relationship with Her Majesty, the late Queen. She obviously respected her. They had a love there. So it's not fair that Catherine had to miss out because, Meghan might get her feelings hurt. Oh, okay. And did Meghan seem to care about the Queen getting her feelings hurt when she went on national TV and lied? No? Okay, great. Let's continue on. Let's see here. All right. So then they're quoting out of Harry's book and they say, then that's all you needed to say, Harry replied. To which one family friend asks, why then did Harry even feel the need to put this in his book? The Prince of Wales, talking about Charles at the time, had enough to think about. That's what I'm saying too. That's what we've all said, without worrying about where those two next grievance was coming from. I wish they hadn't called them at all. I know that's petty, but I don't care. Those two suck. By now, Harry had missed all available flights to Aberdeen. He set about chartering his own plane. It was just as well that he did not know the real reason for the Duchess of Cambridge's absence from Balmoral. She had certainly not been asked to stay away. Rather, it was start of new term at school for all three children. George, Charlotte, and Louis had already been for their induction day at Lambrook, their Berkshire, I hope I'm saying that right, Berkshire preparatory school the previous morning, 7th of September. It was the Duchess who had decided that one parent should be with the children on such an important day. As one royal aide acknowledges, quote, it was by luck rather than judgment, but it made it a lot easier to tell Harry he was coming alone. So again, just think about that. They all had to look out during this time for Harry's precious ego. He makes me sick. His precious ego and his stupid wife, his Instagram-loving bee-wife, and excuse me. And so they all had to work around how those two felt and how those two were making it about themselves. Now, I've heard the other version of events, not quite this, that Harry and Meghan were having blowout fights. Meghan was throwing a fit over the phone. They stalled everything. It was because of this stalling. that the Prince of Wales, unfortunately, was not there when the Queen passed. All right, let's keep reading. It should be remembered that even at this point, no one knew quite how bad the situation had become. Oh, I had another thought, which was, man, I love Catherine, Princess of Wales, so much. Obviously, she did not know that the Queen was passing. I feel confident in saying, although I'm just guessing, I feel confident in saying she would have been there had she had known. But I love her so much, and she's taking care of her children. Imagine that, something that Harry and Meghan know less than nothing about. Let's keep going. All right. It should be remembered that even at this point, no one knew quite how bad the situation had become. There was serious mounting alarm, yet no panic. At this stage, people were still thinking in terms of days rather than hours, let alone an hour of two, says one member of staff. Hence the fact that the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall decided to leave the Queen to rest for a while under the altering gaze of the Princess Royal and Angela Kelly, while the Reverend Kenneth Mackenzie, long-serving Church of Scotland minister, I'll never be able to say this right, is it Crathy? I hope I'm saying that right, at Crathy Church, and chaplain to the Queen, read to her from her Bible. Okay, and then they go into the details of the Queen's passing. For my own mental health and sanity, I'm just going to keep going past this. The good news is that the doctor assured everybody that she basically fell asleep and felt no pain. So there's that. All right. I'm disgusted by those other two. I continue. I mean, I just can. I'm breathing. I'm trying to think of how to articulate this. I'm disgusted. Okay, so then they go into the details. Again, Charles, he was actually behind the wheel of his car. He famously does not carry a cell phone. He was with Queen Camilla, or she would have been Duchess of Cornwall at the time. And somebody, I forget who they said was with him, and one of his men was with him, and he got a vibration in his pocket, got the phone call, handed it to Charles, and was told to pull over. And so then it goes into how Charles had to make decisions very fast and then break the news to the rest of the family. So it was then that Charles broke the news to William. And at that point, William was driving or being driven from Aberdeen to Balmoral. All right. You know, I can't stand them, but we got to do it. I need to read you this part, or go over this part with you as well. If you're following along with me, we're now on page, hold on, I'm looking up, page 70. Oh my goodness, here we go. All right. So the king was thus able to break the news to Prince William, the Duke of York, the Earl of Wessex, as they were driving from Aberdeen Airport to the castle. The Queen's beloved niece, Lady Sarah Chatto, who was nearby, arrived in tears because the sudden decline and passing of the Queen had been so much swifter than anyone expected. Nearly all the members of the royal family had been unable to say a formal goodbye. Okay, everybody take a collective breath. Here we go. Those two. All right, talking about Harry. This time he's talking about Harry. I won't say his title. Harry was still in the air and out of contact. In his memoir, Spare, he suggests that no one had told him, and he was reduced to learning the news from BBC website as the plane was landing. Well, this author, Robert Hardman, alleges not exactly. A member of the palace staff says that the king had been urgently trying to make contact with his younger son. There were repeated attempts to get through, but no calls were going through because Harry was airborne. So again, Harry, in an attempt to play victim, make it about himself, make he and Meghan the victims here, and to allege things, in my opinion, it's just to further this narrative that the family was the Eastward and they wouldn't talk to him because he's married to Meghan. I don't even know. You can't even justify it. I can't with those two. So that's it for them. The chapter wraps up explaining that the Queen is said to have known that the end was imminent and that she had planned accordingly. And then I'm really enjoying this author's writing. He is very respectful of Her Majesty the late Queen and goes into that she was a wonderful and hardworking woman who was completing paperwork until about 2 days before her passing, and really went into all the things she was working on and how she didn't want to let people down, and was really just an amazing woman. So I'm going to end it here and we'll move on from this. But I just wanted to give this chapter the respect it deserved, and give this topic the respect that it deserved. And then we'll go into more on everything else in the shenanigans, of course, of Hank and Skank. You guys, this was kind of tough. I don't love talking about this stuff. I get upset about it. I love Her Majesty the late Queen. So let's all take a deep breath and send each other big hugs and cups of tea. And remember the Queen and how wonderful and lovely she not just was, but is, and her hard work, and I don't know, all the amazing things she's done. Now, on this part, I'm going to be totally honest with you. We got to the boring part. We don't do boring here. So here's the deal. I am going to hit the highlights on chapter 4, 5, and 6, because honestly, to me, that's the first time I've hit a dry spot in this book. So I'm going to hit the highlights for you, but then in this episode, we're going to dive into chapter 7, Headwinds. Let me just tell you, it's the Harry and Meghan that we all need. No, let me rephrase that. We don't need them. The Harry and Meghan takedown that we need. Again, Hardman does a great job of rebutting things that they've claimed, pointing out their awful behavior. I'm excited to get into this with you. I'm just going to hit the highlights of 4, 5, and 6. It talks about Charles and his first days in the new position as king. And again, I made the disclaimer in the other videos. I'll say it here. No disrespect. When I say that about when I call him Charles, you know who I mean. I mean King Charles. Obviously, I respect him. Same with Catherine, Princess of Wales. She's my favorite. But when I get into these books, I sometimes get a little less formal and I just talk. So I'm like, oh, Charles did this. Again, no disrespect. It's King Charles. Here's my formal announcement. His name is King Charles. We know this. Chapter 4, 5, and 6 is about Charles's first days on the throne, what that was like for him. It really, it is interesting, but not to explain, if that makes any sense. So if you're reading the book, don't skip it. Read it, because it goes into, even details like they had set up a video to prepare Charles for the first few days on what to do, what to say, how to handle things. And it sounds like he had really good people around him. Now, notably, remember in Spare, unfortunately reread that one, Harry kept on about the bee, the wasp, and the fly. And he really talked down about these men in gray suits. They were code names for Queen Elizabeth's private secretary. Okay, so the bee was allegedly Queen Elizabeth's private secretary, Sir Edward Young. They think that Clive Alderton, who was Charles's private secretary, is the wasp. And William's private secretary, Simon Case, is the fly. But you should know, and Harry was such a prick to them. What else is new? That's what we've come to know from Harry. But you should know that Charles speaks so highly of them and how much they really helped him. In particular, it was Queen Elizabeth's private secretary, Sir Edward Young, as well as his private secretary, Clive Alderton, who were so helpful in his transition in these days. So it's interesting to me from that point of view, knowing how Harry talks so shitty about these people, and Charles couldn't be more complimentary about how helpful and integral they were in helping him know what to do and how to navigate these waters. So chapter 4 was a little bit tedious. I thought it was called D-Day. As explained, it was about that transition for Charles and assuming the role in the first few days, what that was like. Okay, here's the highlight for me of this chapter, page 76 on my copy. Again, it's going to be around that page depending on which book you read. I don't have to keep explaining in case you didn't watch the other ones. That's just a thing, but it doesn't matter. Page 76, I'm just going to talk about this one passage. So it talks about Charles's assuming the role. And he relied so heavily on Queen Camilla, her help in the situation, as well as William, Prince of Wales, well, newly Prince of Wales at that point, but Prince of Wales, who was staying at Birk Hall. Birk Hall is the name of Charles's residence in Scotland, which is right near Balmoral. It's explained that the king needed to have many discreet discussions with William. In the past, in the years gone by, it would have automatically included Harry. But of course not anymore. That was clearly not the occasion for an opening up of hearts with Prince Harry. And then this is my favorite line, particularly if he's still taking notes for his forthcoming book. So obviously we know Prince Harry cannot be trusted. And it's interesting to see it from this point of view of what Charles was dealing with, and knowing that even in this one could argue, one of his most important times of his life, assuming the role of king, he needed to keep Harry away because he needed to have William there, and William was the dependable one, and he was able to have these conversations with William, Prince of Wales. Love him too, full respect. But with William during this time. And it's just, I like hearing this. I like knowing that William is there for his father, and he can always depend on William, and William's going to be, king one day. That's the highlight of that chapter for me. We already know it, but seeing that William is so dependable, and how King Charles and William, Prince of Wales, they have this closer relationship. They're fully trusting each other. And he admits that King needed William by his side at this point, and he could count on him. So William was staying with him at the house to have these conversations and to make the plans for the future. They could not trust that old Harry wouldn't be wearing a wire, so he was not invited. I fully love that. And I wish I was a fly on the wall when Harry got word about that. Unfortunately, Hardman didn't tell us. He may not have had any knowledge of how Harry reacted to that, but I kind of love it. Chapter 5, I'm breezing past. It's finished. Not super juicy there, just more of the details of Charles taking over the throne, and what it was like for him, and again, how William helped. There's one quick Harry and Meghan mention, but it wasn't even juicy, so I'm moving right on. Chapter 6 is called Transition. It's an interesting deep dive into how different residences and properties changed hands during this time, how different situations were handled. Again, it's an interesting read, but as it's not juicy, I'm going to keep going. All right, let's get to the juicy parts. I've been waiting. You've been waiting. Let's go. Chapter 7, Headwinds. Here we go. Out of the gate, shots fired. Let me explain. The author kind of goes into Charles's honeymoon period, if you will, like how it was, he had just transitioned to being the king, and how the media was kind of letting him do his thing and all this, but about a month in, storm started a brewing. And it started with The Crown. I've seen a couple episodes of The Crown. I really haven't watched much. I know some people like it, some people do not. It doesn't matter to me. The point that the author tries to make with this is the royal family, I guess, famously have said they will not watch it. They disagree with a lot of the ways that they're being portrayed. He goes into how it actually hurt Prince Philip pretty bad, learning some of the things that he was being blamed for. Anyway, okay. All that said, the author on the first page of this chapter goes into how Harry had been a particular irritation around this time, because he made this announcement. I remember him saying this. The Crown was loosely based on the truth. He did this right after they struck their deal with Netflix. I just want to take a second and underline this point. So see what Harry did there. His family has been vocal about they don't watch it or they're upset by it. So what does Harry do? He's signed a deal with Netflix, so he's going to promote the show for them. It's nothing new, of course. They value paychecks over family and friends and anything of substance, so it's not shocking. I just wanted to bring our attention to this point. The first inkling of their Netflix project, Harry and Meghan's, would be revealed soon enough. So that 6-part, please give me that time back, fly on the wall confessional, Harry and Meghan. They said that would be a prelude, a mere hors d'oeuvre ahead of something bigger still. So October 27th, 1 week after the trailer for The Crown, Prince Harry's publishers announced that his long-awaited memoir was finally close to completion. It would be published around the world in early January, promising, quote, a raw and unflinching honesty. I'm sorry. When are they ever known for honesty? I would call Spare so many things, but honest is not one of them. Oh my goodness. Let's see here. Oh, did you know that in Poland, the book was titled The Other One? I think that's hilarious. I may have known that at the time, but I think I forgot that. But I cracked up when Robert Hardman reminded us that in Poland, the book was called The Other One. Is that why we call him The Other One? That one? But then Robert Hardman goes on to say, it's not hard to detect an overreaching underdog theme. I find that so funny and so well said, Because especially knowing what's going on in real time with those two, how are they going to play victim next? The underdogs, my ass. Every opportunity in the world, and they're calling themselves the underdogs. The part that I didn't realize is that when this announcement was made about Harry's upcoming book, it was done actually on the same day that the Royal Mint had struck the first coins featuring the face of King Charles. The 50p coin would be in circulation in December, but it was a big deal, right? That's when the announcement was made. Nothing new for those two. Of course, they're going to pick a day when the royal family has something going on. Remember, I don't even like saying his name, but Omid tried to deny that was a thing. They never do that. They always do that. I've done videos on how that's their thing to do. But continuing on, I'm on page 142. Asked about the king's feeling on all this imminent incoming fire from those two, one palace staffer talked headwinds, that's where the chapter name comes from, face far from across the Atlantic. That's the only way of describing an extraordinary 12-week run of non-stop, disobliging headlines and combative allegations, all from them entirely beyond the control of the king and his staff. Storm force gales might have been a better metaphor. I mean, I think about that a lot too, and it was discussed at the time that these two and their timing, they were throwing shots as Prince Philip was unfortunately passing away and after he passed away. And then, of course, we know Queen Elizabeth was very ill and still queen and doing everything, and they're still firing shots. And now this, King Charles taking over. Remember, I love my dad and brother very much. That circulate. I hear that on repeat in my head as I think about this situation. So the king is, ascending the throne, and here's Harry doing this. Harry and Meghan both doing this stuff. Future Jen here. I'm editing and I'm pulling pictures to go with what I'm talking about Harry's attitude toward his father at any important event. Case in point, see the picture on the screen. This is Coronation. This is his dad and brother's big day. And look at what a petulant child he's being. He's acting like an ass, and thank God for Princess Anne, Princess Royal's red feather, which I love so much. But no, it's another example of what the author's talking about, how Harry can't stand it that his family does better than him, and instead of working to improve himself or the things he's doing, he wants the easy road, he wants the fame, he wants none of the work involved, and he acts like an ass. All right, so we're still in Headwinds chapter 7. Let's keep going with the juicy stuff, page 149, if you're following along with me, roughly page 149. All right, December 2022, the inaugural trailer appeared for those two's Netflix documentary. Says about their new life in California, I'd say whining victim fest. The first of several teasers, it opened with Harry warning gravely that, quote, I had to do everything I could to protect my family. It was promised, quote, the full truth, end quote. Ha, we know how that turned out. The royal family and their staff were therefore steeling themselves for reprise of that Oprah interview from March 2021. So also presented as, quote, the truth. Again, I draw your attention to how many lies we've uncovered since that came out. So the author goes on to compare it to the, that one, the interview with Diana and Martin Bashir in 1995. He called that an astonishing unburdening of family secrets, and what a big deal that was. So in addition to Meghan's allegations of royal, quote, conversations, the one we're talking about, she said she had received no palace support, who could forget that, when she was feeling, the word I can't say here on YouTube, you know what I'm talking about, taking oneself out. Later in the same film, Harry claimed that he had been cut off financially. Again, we've discussed why that doesn't make any sense and talked about, I don't believe that to be the case, and was no longer speaking to his father. Although those two principal target was the media, and although there was, the author says several inconsistencies, I would say more than several, the couple had claimed, for example, that the Archbishop, who could forget this, of Canterbury had married them 3 days before their wedding. Although we saw through that, if you had any question at all, I'd draw your attention to the face that Harry made when she said that. I mean, what are you... Okay, I've been through it. What is she thinking? Anyway, but of course the Archbishop spoke up and says, no, not the case. The film had been excruciating for the family. It also prompted the late Queen to issue one of her most quoted lines of her long life. Recollections may vary. I love that so much. I think of Her Majesty the late Queen. I also think of Catherine, Princess of Wales, as it was revealed that allegedly she fought to keep that statement in. So again, both ladies love them. However, that Oprah Winfrey exchange had lasted 85 minutes. This new iterations of the Sussexes, I don't say their titles, of those two's, quote, truth, they do not know that word, would last the best part of 6 hours. I will never forget that. I worked on recapping it, and I was telling Jay would come down and check on me and say, how are you? I kept saying, I want my life back. I don't want to do this. Anyway, but I am glad we covered it and uncovered so many lies throughout. All right, with little indication of what might be in store for this time, except that it was unlikely to be good news. The royal family had simply had to press on with their engagements. Okay, so they do go into, and this is something I liked about the book, the author does a good job of explaining things like patronages that are very important to King Charles and how many are so important to King Charles. One thing I didn't realize, I honestly, again, I admit, I just don't know as much about Charles as I do about some of the other ones. So one of them that the author discusses in particular is called BITC. It's called Business in the Community. It's a favorite charity of the King's. He had been a founding patron of it, and it's been running for over 40 years. Can you believe that? That's amazing. It had started because of a meeting in 1982 with Black community leaders campaigning for better job opportunities in many parts of inner city Britain. So I know you guys know this, but, think about that when the Sugars are saying the things that they're saying, and Harry and Meghan are saying the things that they're saying. Again, I know this is crazy. I mean, I can't stand either of them, but this is what burns me up about Harry. Meghan knows nothing and says these claims, and Harold just goes along with it and doesn't even try to, put forth the facts like this. Okay. For more, Hardman goes into how over the years, King Charles had helped cajole leaders of some of Britain's best-known companies into adopting more socially responsible and inclusive recruitment policies. At least 1,000 companies representing more than 6 million employees had now signed BITC's, don't finish that, I know, I was going to add BITC's Race at Work Charter. Indeed, it had become a rite of passage for a new CEO of any large British company to be invited to join at that point, Prince of Wales, on one of his seeing is believing bus tours of struggling corner of a British city. Few declined. I think that's amazing. I think that's really cool to know. And I think it's great that the author, again, is highlighting things like this, something we would never hear from, the dastardly duo. Then, of course, he became king. He's had to wind down some of his active involvements in organizations like this. So he had this central hall gathering, they called it, where it was a celebration, but also I'm going to do my best, but I have to kind of step back because I'm king now type situation. But the author goes into the sadness that was hanging over this because, again, Harry and Meghan were clouding things. These good things that he was doing, they were trying to cloud. I'm sorry, I'm just taking a time out and processing this, and I'm thinking, if they felt strongly, why didn't they join in and this organization and help? Why am I hearing about this? I mean, again, I'm American, so I don't know about this. You guys in the UK are probably very aware of this, but BITC thing. But how come Harry and Meghan weren't involved in this, right? If this is a cause that's so near and dear to them, and they're not afraid to go on any ridiculous talk show that'll have them and discuss things like this, and yet there's this. And the other thing that comes to mind, I did a video on this, was that I don't want to go too dark, but the funeral that they attended that involved a terrible situation involving race. You can, again, check out my video on it. And they acted like assholes. So again, you'd think it was extra sensitive to them if You'd think it was something that was extra sensitive to them, and they acted like a-holes. They allegedly arrived late. They made a scene. People were giving them looks. I mean, it was absolutely ridiculous. She was totally inappropriately dressed, but what else is new? All right, I digress. So those two, Harry and Meghan, were in New York the same day to receive that Ripple of Hope Award. You know the one, the Kennedy Award. I have to read this. Get ready. In recognition of their work of racial justice, mental health, and other social impact initiatives. So I tell you again, so the king is actually out doing things, it sounds like, to help the situation. These two are buying or picking up or whatever, making up awards, slapping their names on awards and patting themselves on back. And I ask you, what have they actually done to help anybody? Again, in real time, I don't know, when this is going up and when you'll be watching it, but we're dealing with the park situation. At the time of this recording, they have not addressed it. And who knows, again, it might be a couple days that this comes out. They may have, but they have so far to address it. So yeah, I can definitely see where their priorities lie. More in the seat number that they're in and more of the award that they're getting than the actual helping with a solution to things like this. Absolutely disgusting. Let's continue. The founder's president, Kerry Kennedy, saluted them for being, quote, incredibly brave in speaking out on such issues. After receiving the award, which was praised for their, quote, lifelong commitment. I'm sorry, I read it like that because I'm disgusted. And so these words are like acid in my mouth. I hate it. I think this is so horrible. I'm talking about them with the nerve to take on an award like this, to pat themselves on the back. For what? What are we talking about? They have done nothing but made things divisive and, again, tried to steal focus for themselves. They're incredibly brave. Okay, let's continue. Let's see here. They were praised for a lifelong commitment to building strong, equitable communities through Archwell, to which they issued a joint statement. Together we know that a ripple of hope can turn into a wave of change. Have you ever heard more bullshit in your life? Because I haven't. What have they done? What is this ripple of hope and what is this wave of change? Because we see none of it. You're just saying these words and nothing is being done. Nothing is changing. Meanwhile, back in Britain, staff who had watched the king bring about his own, quote, a wave of change. Again, I love this author. I love how he writes, using their own words back against them. Over many decades, through his Prince's Trust, business in the community, and multiple other organizations could either laugh or cry. Even those two most fervent admirers would acknowledge that in its 2-year infancy, Archwell had yet to demonstrate a lifelong commitment. And, at that point, it had only been 2 years. Now it's been, 4 years? How's that lifelong commitment going? It seems to be getting worse. Not that they've ever done anything, but it seems to be even less of nothing. Let's see. That, though, was of no great concern at the palace. What alarmed the king's team was what was coming next. Just 2 days later, the first 3 episodes of Harry and Meghan, that 6-part documentary, which the couple had been busy making when not building equitable communities, right? In return, so it was reported they would receive a substantial but disclosed sum. The next 3 episodes would air a week later. You guys, I'm going to end this here. We still have so much more to go. This is the 4th part of the recap, but we will be picking up on chapter 7 on this one. And I'm excited. This is my favorite chapter. This is the juiciest chapter. This is the second half of the chapter, and we're going to get into this. So much happening, mostly about how awful Harry and Meg are. We knew that, right? But let's get into this. I remember when we left off in the last part of the book, those two were accepting BS made-up awards, Ripple of Hope Award, yeah, right, recognition for their work on, all that stuff. Total BS, right? But meanwhile, the author, Robert Hardman, did a great job of pointing out how Charles was bringing about actual waves of change, not hollow, empty things like Harry and Meghan. Remind me again what Archwell does? Yeah, that's what I thought. Anyway, so it's again, I'm just enjoying the heck out of this book. He writes so well. He talks about this was a really hard time for everybody. So Harry and Meghan was just about to drop the first 3 episodes. The second 3 would be not much long after. You guys, every time I bring this up, I think about watching that thing, that 6-part, what they call it a documentary. It was not that. It was just a 6-part wine fest. It was, oh, I want those 6 hours back. Okay. So he goes on to explain the documentary. We've seen it, but I'll touch on some of the highlights that he says because he has a great way of explaining it. He calls the main villains of the piece were the British press, but how many withering remarks there were about the royal family and the monarchy. And recalls that Harry talked of the pain and suffering of women marrying into this institution because they always have to play victim. And remember, he took a big old jab at everybody and said something along the lines of, usually they marry someone that will fit the mold rather than who you're destined to be with. So it was basically about whether or not everybody around him had married for love, claiming to be the only one that did. How awful is that? It's not only the most selfish thing he could think to say, it's so hurtful. And obviously it was designed, in my opinion, it was designed to hurt. He was trying to hurt those around him. He was trying to hurt, in my opinion, especially William, Prince of Wales, and Catherine, Princess of Wales. And the author again goes on, I'm on page, let's see here, sorry. I'm on page 151 if you're trying to read along with me. But the author goes into how it seemed to be a blatant attack on Catherine. And at first he was wondering if it was just Harry shooting off at the mouth, but again seems to land that it tends to be a blatant attack on Catherine, Princess of Wales, and how for William, this was the lowest of the low. So opinions, again, were divided. They were trying to figure out how calculated this was. If it was a calculated slight against Prince of Wales or if it was a case of Harry shooting off his mouth. Can it be both? I think he's always attacking William and Catherine. Okay, so they go into, I love this author. He goes into calling this thoughtless allegations. But elsewhere in the story, Harry accused his family of a huge level of, say it together, unconscious bias. And then they go into Meghan and how she dismissed the original engagement interview. Do you remember this? That interview they did where they were like all weird. A lot of you say that you saw red flags there. I honestly didn't. I don't even remember watching this interview until I got invested in this whole thing. Yeah, I get it. Red flags everywhere. Yeesh. I covered it on Patreon. All right. So Meghan went on to dismiss this interview as, quote, rehearsed and an orchestrated reality show. And I'd say, what has everything been that you guys have ever done, talking about Harry and Meghan, but a rehearsed, orchestrated, I wouldn't even call it a reality show. I know those things are usually like pre-planned. Sorry to burst the bubble. But what the heck? Think about Harry and Meghan's last appearance at Invictus, where they were pretending to play the part of being in love. And it was the most over-the-top, orchestrated, rehearsed thing I think I've seen. I honestly couldn't stop laughing. And then to top it all off, remember she marched in front of actual servicemen and women. Awful, awful people. All right, let's keep going. Lest we never forget, right? So this came as something of a surprise, her, again, referring to it as an orchestrated reality show, to the BBC, who conducted this. As one of its most experienced and highly regarded journalists, the one that did the interview felt that she had conducted herself in a thoroughly professional interview. She coolly restricted her response to the words of the late Queen. Can we say this one together? Recollections may vary. I love it. I didn't realize that the person who conducted the interview spoke out with recollections may vary. Love that and love her. They don't do anything. Well, I could just end that sentence there. They don't do anything. They don't do anything to make themselves likable, do they? As I'm recording this, I just came off of recording, again, I don't know when this will go up. It'll probably be a week later, but the Jane Goodall of it all, where we just found out that Harry had kind of snapped at Jane Goodall when she was a guest in their house and was being interviewed and got to hold baby Archie, and he was kind of a dick to her, right? And then being a dick to Travolta at the Faux Awards aviation show. I mean, he's a miserable prick, isn't he? Sheesh, let's move on. So 4 days later, the trailer for the second part of this awfulness landed with more of the same. I wasn't being thrown to the wolves. I was being fed to the wolves. She's not sure what she's saying, said Meghan. And then remember, we got they were happy. I wish Jay was here. He's not here to record the voice. They were happy to lie to protect my brother, said Harry. So the last 3 episodes came out. Yeah, it's just more of the awfulness. It just brings it all back for me. He then goes into the relocation to California and how Harry referred to it as a freedom and a audacious escape, that sort of thing. Again, Robert Hardman, who is now a member of the Drunk Goose Club, because I like the way he writes, says this wasn't so much a documentary series, but a curated self-portrait. I thought that was a nice way of saying, yeah, they're full of themselves. They couldn't stop making it about themselves and making themselves victims. But I might be putting words in his mouth. So then he points out the prominent credit in the title sequence of their own production company, Archwell. Shocker, right? Again, what has Archwell done? Oh, wait. Okay, so from here, we go into... He talks about, the 6th episode comes out and what happens to everybody because of this. Their already existing fans hug them closer still. The critics groaned more and the neutrals remained neutral. So the author goes on to say it was 6 hours of first world whinging. Then he goes into the most cantankerous of the moments. Oh, you guys, we all get very heated over this. But when the smirking Meghan performed a comic repeat of her first curtsy to the Queen. Those are the author's words. I would not call it comic, but I get what he's saying. The queasy look of discomfort on Harry's face was that of a man all too aware of the consequences, yet unable to do anything about it. Ooh, that's a good way to describe him. Social media once again lit up with the criticism not confined to the usual suspects. Yet again, the king and the family said nothing. So he refers to this a lot, their dignified silence, and how Harry and Meghan should have taken a cue from that, but did not. Again, I mean, this is obvious, but I can't help but think, of course, they know this. They know that the palace won't speak out. They weaponize this, Harry and Meghan do. So they say all these things. They can throw out anything that is their truth. I'm sorry. Every time I say their truth, I laugh because they do not know the truth. And there is no such thing as their truth. It's either true or not true, but they wouldn't understand that. Talking about Harry and Meghan. But again, it goes into the silence on the part of the royal family. Meanwhile, during all this time and while this was going on, King Charles had his first Christmas broadcast of his reign. He chose St. George's Chapel in Windsor, one of my favorite places in the world. I love that place. I've been in there. It's wonderful. It happened at 3 p.m. On 25th of December. I want to talk about, we're still in chapter 7, page 155, because this came one of my favorite lines of the book. And I don't mean that, well, there are a lot of great lines, especially when calling out Harry and Meghan, but I just thought this was really cool. So the author is explaining the royal family and how that works. And well, you'll see what I'm saying. I don't have to explain this to my UK friends, but as an American here, it just kind of was interesting and it hit home. I had always heard that the Queen wanted to be a calming force. The way the author describes it, he calls it dwelling on the inspirational power of everlasting light in a dark world. I thought that was so well said. It bears repeating. Here we go. Dwelling on the inspirational power of everlasting light in a dark world. Cool. Wonderful. Where's that for us? That's why I latch on so hard to the royal family. I think that's a great way to explain that. And it's just, again, a calming force. I found that so interesting and so well said. It just kind of summed things up, I think, for a lot of us. And for, again, it's a good way to explain it to somebody like myself who did not grow up with a royal family, but who has adopted yours. All right, let's keep going. So, God, I hate to switch gears, but back to Dumb and Dumberton. Prince Harry had agreed to do these interviews for the book. Now remember, this book was coming out. All of a sudden, pages started leaking, and we'll get into the leak, but pages started leaking, right? And so people kind of knew what was going to happen with this book. It was going to be a wine fest. His version of a tell-all. I don't think he knows how to tell anything. But it was just remember the preparation for this. And I do remember Meghan had disappeared at this point and kind of left him to do these promotional things. And I find that very funny because, yeah, I think he was kind of the laughing stock on a lot of this stuff. But they put out trailers for the Anderson Cooper of it all. And the author says that the clip appeared to be more like a Netflix rerun as Harry lobbed the same charge of media/palace collusion into the mix. Silence is betrayal were his words. Again, I'd like to point out, I actually tweeted this out when the Parks news broke. I'm sorry, Harry, didn't you say silence is betrayal when you say your silence? Again, I don't know if it's come out, if he said anything since I've recorded this, but at the time of this recording, it's been days since the news broke and we haven't heard anything from him. Silence is betrayal, Harry. But it's interesting. He likes to use things like this to play victim, but to actually maybe make a change or try to help in some way, nah, can't do it. All right. So continuing on, I can't with this. You guys, he just sucks so bad. They both do. All right. And we'll get into why Meghan sucks, but right now it's on why Harry sucks so bad. So they're putting out all this press. And then the author says a day later, Tom Bradby's ITV tried to take a different tact and put out a trailer that it was more of they tried to go positive with it. And they had the soundbite of Harry saying, "I'd like my father back. I'd like my brother back." But then 3 days later, ITV released another trailer and they asked Harry, "Hey, you want to attend the King's coronation, a big deal for your dad?" And his response, "The door is always open. The ball's in their court." So he's just trying to goad them into a response and trying to put it on them. And again, take no accountability whatsoever. Harry really is sickening. They both are. So then continuing on, it was January 5th when The Guardian obtained a chunk of the text. And then also remember that Spain decided to put a few copies on sale early so that regular customers could buy them as Epiphany gifts. So this is where it gets funny. We all suspected that it was released early for a frenzy, for the news, for the media, to talk about this book, right? Well, the author, Robert Hardman, here goes in and says, well, you didn't think this out very much. And, the Sussexes, I don't use their title, but in this case, it's kind of funny. So go with me. The Sussexes' sworn enemy, the British tabloid press, could have possibly paid like a 7-figure sum for exclusive glimpse, even a day before the publication, right? But instead, the dum-dums, whoever leaked it, right, I have to say, we don't know who it was, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, we know. So because dum-dums had the idea to leak this early because they think they know best on everything, well, these people that would have paid up to 7-figure sums, allegedly, I think that might be a little steep, but whatever, I see where he's going. Because they decided to jump the gun early, the people that would have paid that were holding a copy of the whole book and had only paid a few euros for it. So joke's on you, idiots. So he explains the teams of Spanish translator that were working against the clock to try to go chapter by chapter and get this content out. And then Robert Hardman again goes into how this is possibly the most candid and caustic royal memoir ever written. And he goes into the sensational claims, talking about how Prince William had physically attacked his younger brother, allegedly, and that argument and the necklace break, that sort of thing. He goes into a ridiculousness that Harry would release private conversations that he was having. And again, I say allegedly on that, not to protect Harry, but because I don't believe most of the things Harry put in his book. But conversations that were claimed by Harry and his terribly ill-judged decision to wear that uniform and how Harry tried to claim it was not his fault and all the substances Harry got into, that sort of thing. There were intimate revelations. We know, we read the book. I cannot go back over that, but you know what I'm saying. The revelations about his loss of virginity, his frostbitten, you know what, I had to use mommy's face cream. Just everything, all the stuff that Harry had written, right? Well, he talked about how, in the author's opinion, no one could have been dreading this book more than Queen Camilla. And then he brings up how Harry had recalled his fears ahead of meeting her for the first time, and if she'd be all the wicked stepmothers in the storybooks. And remember, he's doing this on purpose. He's likening her to the wicked stepmother because he likes to hurt people with his words. He and Meghan, they like to hurt people. They can't fire back. Again, see Catherine, Princess of Wales for details. Then the author goes into how ridiculous it is that Harry continued to repeatedly accuse Queen Camilla, of conducting her own PR campaign at the expense of the young princes. And remember, he talked about how things could have only been leaked by, and he goes into talking about Harry in his book accused Camilla of leaking things. Well, the author goes in to explain what we had heard before. No, that's not what happened. That at the time when it came out, Camilla was absolutely let me back up so you understand what the hell I'm talking about. I know a lot of you know, but in case you don't. All right. It was July 1998 when this piece came out. It was fully documenting their first encounter to Camilla when she met William and Harry. So Harry is accusing Camilla of leaking this information. It was talked about in another book we read. I just can't remember which one. It doesn't matter. That Camilla was mortified when this came out and that she immediately turned around and launched an internal investigation. The one person whom she had told about her experience with meeting Harry and William was her personal assistant, Amanda McManus, keeper of her diary. Well, McManus, turns out, told her husband James worked for a newspaper and confided an ex-colleague. So you get where it's going. So it ends up being printed. Well, Amanda ended up issuing a public apology and immediately resigned. So it sucks. And I'm not saying it's right what happened, but I am saying it doesn't sound like it was Camilla's fault. The author himself on page 158, one of my other favorite lines, he calls it, quote, a pure cock-up. A pure cock-up. So a quarter of a century later, the new queen, Camilla, and her staff made no comment on this because they've all moved on. Naturally, the world wanted to hear Prince William's thoughts since Harry's leaking out all this information. But the author of this book says he was assured by people surrounding Prince William and Catherine, Princess of Wales, that neither of them read it. It was a senior advisor who says this. He's a grown-up 40-year-old, about William, with the BBC app on his phone. So he knows what this book says. And the senior advisor goes on to say that he knows people like me will tell him, not me, but the senior advisor. I wish I could tell him stuff. I'd say, you're doing great. I love your wife. Now strip titles from your brother. Okay, bye. That's what I would say. Okay, anyway, back to the story. So basically, no, he has not read the book. He doesn't need to. He's read news highlights, I'm sure, and he has people around him that can tell him the low points of what's being said. And they claim the same with the Netflix series. And that there's so many people were urging Prince William to respond to some of those other two charges, and he decided to remain silent on it. All right, so continuing on, we're on page 158 if you're following along. So throughout the book, Harry was keen to stress this devotion toward Her Majesty the late Queen and Prince Philip. Reflecting on her grandmother after his passing, he wrote special relationship. That's what they said about us. Okay, again, I don't mean to keep bringing up this Jane Goodall thing, but let me remind you that allegedly when Dr. Jane Goodall came to visit Harry when he was doing the interview, held baby Archie, she referenced his grandmother. This was in 2019. So they were still with the royal family, and God, now I forget the exact quote, but Harry was a dick to her and basically said, she said something like, oh, he'll have to learn the royal wave, just like Her Majesty the Queen, something like that. And Harry's like, no, he will not be living his life. Something like, he will not be growing up like that. I'm sorry, Doofus, didn't you and Duchess Doofus insist on titles for your kids? And now you're going to pull this crap? Really? Not even now. Back then, you were pulling this crap, and yet you threw a fit publicly, several in fact, about the titles for your children. You accuse people of horrible things like holding out titles based on colors and stuff that wasn't actually happening. Blatant lies. And yet, again, okay. All right, let's keep going. My head's going to explode. I smell burnt toast. And let me show you the brilliance of Robert Hardman. Here we go. Okay. So he's explaining how Harry's hanging on this special relationship with Her Majesty the late Queen. And let me be clear. I love Her Majesty the late Queen. I am not mocking her. I'm mocking her idiot grandson. All right. So the special relationship, right? Well, Hardman goes on to say, well, now that's interesting. So he's clinging on to his special relationship with the Queen, and yet, he sure didn't mind attacking some of her staff. And then Hardman apparently talked to them, and it says they wouldn't respond, but they were interested by what had been omitted from the book. So one privately recalled that the Queen had been, quote, as angry as I'd ever seen her in 2021 after those two, and we know where we're going with this, that baby name. They announced that the Queen had given her blessing with that baby name. We know it's full of shit, right? We've talked about that, but oh God, seeing it in print. And so this is the brilliance of this author. That's where I'm trying to go with this. Sorry, it's kind of a murky way to get there. But do you see what he did there? So he's like, oh, okay, Harry. So interesting. You talk about your special relationship with the Queen. You bash her staff. And then the author talks to the staff and then finds a way to say, no, since you bashed her staff, they'd like to tell you that the Queen's been as angry as I'd ever seen her. And again, talking about the call with the name. And the way he's saying it is allegedly they didn't have permission to the name. Why am I saying it like that? I don't think they had permission either, but they like to sue everybody, so I'm covering my bases here. Go with me on this. Again, they fired off legal actions against anyone who dared suggest that they were not telling the full truth, right? When have we ever known them to lie? That's just not a thing. But however, those two tried to co-opt the palace into propping up their version of events. Guess what? They were rebuffed. Once again, it was a case of recollections may vary. Interesting how everybody else has similar stories, but Harry and Meghan cannot keep their story straight. But I like how everybody's telling them recollections may vary. Those noisy threats of legal actions seem to evaporate for some reason, and the libel action against the BBC was never materialized. So the author wraps up this chapter by one of my other favorite lines from this book that says, the nation's formerly favorite cheeky chappie has turned into a rather pathetic middle-aged man. Shall we read that again? That's good. So the nation's former favorite cheeky chappie has turned into a rather pathetic middle-aged man. I would like to make sure Harry sees that. Finally, the author is very clear to point out, hey, all that crap they said didn't really have an effect. He goes into the opinion polls. Sure enough, they showed barely any variation in the king's approval ratings from the start of these, quote, headwinds to the end. They remained a few points down on his post-accession high, but still firmly at the similar mark that it had been. So then the author says that, as the Queen herself liked to say in times of adversity, this too shall pass, and it had. So that's it for the chapter. We will pick up with chapter 8 in the next part. As we are continuing on with this book, The Making of the King / Charles III, depending on which one you read, same book it sounds like. But I'm so glad you're here. So today we are on part 5, picking up with chapter 8. Now, let's talk. I keep it real here. Let's be real. This part goes deep into Coronation. Honestly, we're going to be covering chapter 8 through 15, and it's all about Queen Elizabeth's coronation, King Charles's coronation, all the details. Again, I'm enjoying this book so much, and I do recommend that you read or listen to this book. I've had a lot of you saying you're enjoying it as well. This part is very detailed. These chapters that I've chosen for this section all relate to every detail of coronation. So as I talk about this, you'll be seeing these pictures in the background. I love the pictures of Queen Elizabeth and her coronation. And then, of course, we'll go into King Charles and his coronation. So we'll see all that in the background while I talk about it. But that's the reason I've selected these chapters. I will not be covering every detail. I mean, there's just no way. I would recommend, if you're into all the details, again, read this book. If you're not, I'll hit the highlights for you, because there are some that I want to talk about. Starting with chapter 8, and that chapter is called Doing the Same Thing Differently. Now, if you're reading along with me, it picks up on page 165. So we're going into King Charles, and the author does a good job, Robert Hardman, on comparing how King Charles was with his events versus how Queen Elizabeth handled the events. Now, there's a passage I would like to read to you because I just found it so interesting. I love these insights into Queen Elizabeth, Her Majesty the late Queen, and I like to see how she did things. So let's take a look. Again, I'm picking up on page 165. Let's see here. So Robert Hardman is going into how the Queen liked to do things when she would have these big formal events. She liked to have the receiving line at her events, and that she could that way make sure she met and shook hands with every guest, which I think is a very thoughtful detail. For big receptions, she also liked guests to be put in prearranged clusters depending on the nature of the gathering. So, for example, you might move from a group of dentists to a group of teachers to a group of people from a particular city or a regiment or a company, and it would help make each conversation easier if the cluster had something in common. The king does not prefer to do it this way. The Queen liked to do things in a very formal way, says one of his senior team. She liked people in groups. She'd shake hands, she'd move on, and everyone else would stay put. The king says, people want to see me, which is nice, but they also want to see each other. So if you want friendships renewed and networks made, you need to let them move around. So he doesn't mind if it's all a bit random, but overall, the aim is the same. So I love details like that. I'm learning so much from this book, things like that I just wouldn't have known or thought about, and the differences in how Queen Elizabeth did things versus how King Charles does things. All right, changing gears. The other thing that I really enjoyed about this chapter and enjoyed learning about is how King Charles picked up a love of horse racing and horses from his mother. Sounds like this didn't happen until later on. She always exposed him to it. It was actually Queen Camilla who got him more into it and encouraged him to get more interested in the sport. So he made sure that the horses that he inherited from his mother were registered not only to himself, but also Queen Camilla. It was just a thoughtful detail to show that he appreciated Queen Camilla and her role of getting him more into his love of horses. Okay, let's talk about Windsor Castle, because they go into this in chapter 8 as well. And I personally could spend about 14 hours reading about Windsor Castle. I'm fascinated by it. I think it's probably one of the most beautiful places I've ever been in my whole life. I've been twice now, and I'm just aching to go back. So anyway, let's get into Windsor Castle. They talk about how Charles really didn't get to spend too much time there growing up. People around the king predicted that perhaps William would have the run of Windsor, but then he kind of has taken a newfound love in this place. So what they explain is that he likes to spend Sundays in particular at Windsor. He likes to see his grandchildren. Of course, William and Catherine and the children are at Adelaide Cottage on the grounds of Windsor Castle. And there's just an interesting passage I'd like to read from the book here. It's on page 170 if you're reading along with me. And it says, just as George V was insistent on raising his family in York Cottage, Sandringham, it seems that those who are predestined to live in large palaces and castles often cherish a spell in something very much smaller. The future William V and his future queen think so too. So again, it's just about how William and Catherine are raising their children in Adelaide Cottage, but then, eventually one day Windsor will be theirs as well. But I just love reading about it. I love that Charles has taken such a love to it. I'm obsessed with that place. I really want to go back. I can't say enough good things about Windsor. Just as an American who's had a chance to go over there a couple of times, I highly recommend, if you ever get the chance, go to Windsor Castle. All right. That aside, it was just interesting to see how Charles has really taken to it as well. They say he now adds stops over at Windsor when he has the chance to do so. He just loves spending time there. Now, an interesting part that is explained is that basically the royal family just have, to quote the author, a glorified flat there. That the rest is, they have, I think they said something in the neighborhood of 300 people that live either on the grounds or around the grounds and help take care of it, and families and things like that. So they're all very much a part of Windsor Castle. I just think that's so interesting. They even told an anecdote about how the Reagans were staying at Windsor Castle, and they were astonished that to meet the Queen for breakfast, they actually had to walk through the Queen's bedroom to get to this place where they were going to have breakfast on the grounds. And just kind of how the whole setup is for the royal family there. They just have their own private section, but the rest is for, the running of the castle and the staff. And of course, there's tours and parts of it and stuff. So it's just interesting to learn all of that. Okay, let's move on to chapter 9, because I could spend 10 hours talking about Windsor. Chapter 9, Coronation. And comment below if you spend time in Windsor. Let me know. I'm dying to spend more time around Windsor. We've toured the castle twice now, and I love St. George's right there. But I just want to know everything I can about Windsor. I'm completely fascinated by it. Chapter 9, Operation Patek. And it goes into, again, all of this has to do with preparation for coronation. They were actually calling King Charles's coronation Operation Golden Orb. And it's said that he never wanted to compete with Queen Elizabeth II's coronation, and hers was, she was 25 years old at the time of her coronation. She had 2 young children, and Charles was 74 at the time of his. So they talk about how the Queen was very much, she just couldn't be hands-on at that point with her coronation. She chose things that were, that meaningful to her, but the details were left up to others, whereas they say for Charles, King Charles, he liked to choose the things for his own coronation. Okay, I am loving these pictures, and I had to show you this one here because, of course, we have Queen Elizabeth at her coronation and her maids of honor. And notice the white gloves. So people were likening them to swans. Can I just say that most closely related to swans are geese? Honk, honk, everybody. Geese and ganders. Okay, so now is where I skip ahead. Because again, if you read this, and I do recommend it, chapter 10, 11, and 12 all are very much detailing everything having to do with the coronations. All the logistics, the planning, the prep, the run-throughs, all of that sort of thing. Really, really detailed pages of the lead up to the coronation itself. All right, let's get into chapter 13, A Decent-Sized Hat. Why is it named that? Well, It has to do with this one. Actually, no, it has to do with the Princess Royal, should I say that way, and how her beautiful, and as she called it, decent size hat covered up this one. You guys, I'm going to take a side note here and say I think about this constantly, how he showed up, pulled these faces, acted like an ass, and immediately left. Believe me, I think that was the best case that he immediately left. But I think about that, and I think about, I wonder... And I think I'm giving him too much credit, but I do think about this. I wonder if he'll ever come to his senses and think, wow, I really messed up an important day in history. I don't know. I think I'm just giving him way too much credit by thinking like that. We've seen his true colors. He just is an ass. I mean, I think the palace covered for him so long that I wanted to believe there was more to him, but there just doesn't appear to be. Again, look at the photos for details. He just seemingly couldn't wait to get out of there, kept pulling faces. Robert Hardman does go into, I'm skipping ahead, but he does talk about, you know what, we'll get there. Basically, Harry was invited to the lunch afterwards, but declined and left. So again, it just puts into perspective, especially with what's going on now, where he pretended to rush back to be by his dad. And then, yeah, we know how that went. Okay. Let's get back to the Princess Royal, shall we? I just love her. So I've added extra photos of her because I just love her. And I love her decent size hat, as she calls it. Okay, so King Charles had been, they called it an apprenticeship for 74 years. He had been sovereign for 8 months at this point, and he was about to have what they described his grandest and most humble moment of his life. Again, talking about the coronation. It was meant to reflect a modern Britain while keeping tradition alive. So if you're reading along with me, I'm on page 284. They do go into how the working members of the royal family were sat. And Robert Hardman, again, no fan of Harry's, goes out of his way to point out Harry is not a working member of the royal family, so he was sat before other members. And this is a big deal because timing and order are a big deal with the family, and the fact that he was sat out of what would have been his order surely was noticed. It appeared to me, maybe Harry knew, but it appeared to me that Harry seemed to be pouting about his seat. He seems to always be pouting about his seat nowadays. Maybe if you didn't act like an ass, you wouldn't have to worry about your seat. How about that? All right. Again, he was sat behind the Princess Royal, and that's where we got the quite a decent sized hat. And it refers to her quote about the hat itself. I'm kind of obsessed with her and the hat and the whole situation. I think it was brilliantly played. I was fortunate enough to go to Coronation. I will never forget it. It was just one of the coolest things I've ever witnessed. And I mean, I couldn't get anywhere close to it. It was just packed everywhere, but it was so beautiful to see and to be around everybody and to witness. And then I went back to the hotel that evening after a full day of celebrating and then saw the Princess Royal's hat, that feather in the hat. And I couldn't stop laughing. I still think about that moment of seeing, oh my gosh, that hat is wonderful. All right, let's go on to page 14. It was called, chapter 14. It was called I Was Glad. And, okay, so this is where Robert Hardman, the author, goes into that Harry allegedly had been invited to the palace for lunch after the coronation, but declined and was already on his way back to Heathrow. The thing I wish is that the author had gone, and I understand it's a book about Charles, but I wish he had gone more into, I'd like to know everything that was going on with William and Catherine. The day of the coronation, they did kind of go into some of the logistics and how it was wrongly reported that they were late, but it appears that, no, King Charles's, I guess you call it, coach was running a little bit early. I think they had thought it would take a little longer to get there. He didn't. He was supposed to be the last to arrive, but his pulled up right before William and Catherine. So it doesn't matter. I mean, it was a beautiful ceremony. Who cares? But it was interesting to learn behind the scenes that there's kind of a scramble regarding this. I remember the news reporting on stuff like this. I think it's a little bit ridiculous. It all worked out. Beautiful ceremony. Let's keep going. And then chapter 15 we get into, it's called Doctor Who Syndrome. And this one's interesting because it breaks down the patronages, the charities that are represented by different members of the royal family. Now, what I didn't realize is the Queen, Her Majesty the late Queen, was patron of over 600 charities. How cool is that? I think that's really amazing. Over 600 charities, and then King Charles is said to be over 420 at the time of this book. I don't know if that's still the case. 420 of his own. So there was a lot of work to be done about making sure that all the charities were still being represented and reallocating who would handle what and how that would go. Now, there is an interesting passage I'm going to read to you. It's on page 320 if you're reading along with me. So he was talking about charitable funds and charity networks, that sort of thing. And post the session, how it'd work with the Prince's Countryside Fund. It's just all these logistics, right? And how King Charles was handling it. But then the author goes on to explain it's not down to King Charles to approve a royal designation. This required government approval under Companies Act 2006. Ministers retain a role in agreeing what may or may not present itself as a royal entity. Believe me, I'm going somewhere with this. It was a lack of such approval that compelled those two, whose titles I do not say, to take down their SussexRoyal.com business/charity, I'm saying business, franchise in 2020 and grudgingly rename it Archwell. I am fascinated by this. I wish he had gone more into it. He didn't, but I want to know all the details. But he continues on and says it also emerged that the Prince's Countryside Fund had also considered the name the King's Countryside Fund, but the king himself advised against it. Okay, so I just think that's so interesting, and I remember this, we all do, that Sussex Royal. Do you remember? People were horrified to learn, I think the Queen in particular was horrified to learn that those two were trying to merge Sussex Royal, even insofar as taking out SussexRoyal.com. I believe it was alleged at the time things like pens and tchotchkes and I can't even remember the ridiculousness of it. It was over 100 items that were trademarked, and this was done right around the time of Megxit. So you can see this was published in January of 2020. They left around, well, it was around that time actually. Yeah, it's just so funny to me. Remember, they threw such a stink about it when they were told, no, we're not Disney. You can't do that. And they thought this would be their money-making scheme or brand afterwards. But unfortunately, that didn't work out so well for them. And neither has anything else since they left. Ha, 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 ha. So since then, again, ask yourself, what have they been doing? We don't know. Selling stuff? Who knows? Still using their titles? Who knows? Who cares? But I love that the Queen banned them from using that brand, and you can't just sell yourself as royals. Anyway, I'm going to end this here. I think we have maybe 2 more chapters left to go, maybe 3 more, something like that. We're wrapping it up quickly. So I'll wrap this up in the next one. As always, thank you so much for being here with you guys these last few chapters. If you're reading along with me, this is covering chapter 16 through 18. It's been such a good book, and I'm excited to wrap it up and discuss these last few chapters with you. As you see on screen, I just have random happy pictures, right? It's the king with the queen, the king with Her Majesty the late Queen, the king with William, the king with Princess Anne, and the king with Catherine, Princess of Wales. All the people we love. So I'm excited to show these to you. I'm excited to get into this book. Without further ado, let's do it. So right off the bat, we kick off with chapter 16. This one is called, I'm stalling, let's see, chapter 16, The 3 R's. There, right off the bat on this one was an interesting portion of this chapter I want to discuss with you all, because I honestly didn't realize this. And the author, Robert Hardman, brings up such an interesting point I want to talk about. All right. And if you're reading along with me, I'm on page 335. So they go into, Robert Hardman goes into the Commonwealth and how that works. Now, forgive me, I'm American. I understand the concept of it. I really don't know the logistics of it. So I found this part particularly interesting. I'm going to read it. We're going to talk about it. Here we go. Let's see here. So again, talking about King Charles, and it says in regards to the Commonwealth. And it says the organization is a paragon of unity compared to years gone by. So in 2018, for example, its members were unanimous in endorsing the then Prince of Wales, talking about King Charles, as future head. The role has never been hereditary. Did you know that? I didn't know that. The role of the head of Commonwealth. Didn't know that. Let's see. Elizabeth II was not appointed until the Indian Prime Minister. I will not attempt to say his name as fear of butchering it, but the then Indian Prime Minister sent a telegram of condolence on the death of her father, adding that he, quote, welcomed her as the new head of the Commonwealth. The other member states then followed suit. Prince Charles was deemed to have earned it for his services both to the Commonwealth and to the environment over the previous half-century. And then it says, in parentheses here, for many low-lying member states, climate change is now an existential threat. And then it continues and says, is a very good recognition of the personal role of the man himself. They were not choosing the future King Charles III. They were choosing Charles Windsor, in light of his long-term dedication both to the Commonwealth and to the planet, said one senior diplomat who was present. The view was that the job would still be his, even if, for whatever reason, he did not become monarch, or if he stepped aside from being monarch. It raises the intriguing, albeit highly improbable possibility that the king could one day cease to be sovereign of the United Kingdom, but continue as head of the Commonwealth. Did you know that? I didn't know that. That's so interesting to me. I like learning these tidbits like this. It sounds like it wouldn't happen, and they're pretty unanimous in their decisions, and they tend to follow suit. But that's just so interesting to me. I didn't realize that. Let me know in the comments if you knew that, that it's not hereditary to be head of the Commonwealth. Now, I did know, I'd heard that it's optional. You don't have to take on the royal family, as it were, but it's really up to them. But I just find that so interesting. I just didn't realize. I just thought it was, I don't know, it came with the crown. I don't know, it came with the position. I think that's even more interesting, that's the case. All right, so moving on from there, let's get to page 338, because there was one other interesting portion that I want to touch on. This is about Harry and Meghan. And honestly, he gets into Harry a little further, but this is the last mention, I believe, of Meghan. The last one that stood out to me, last mention of Meghan. And it was very quick, and it was in regard to, the claims of those two, the ist words that they like to throw around. Well, the author explains that much of the Caribbean gets its news through U.S. outlets, and he says that the U.S. media were generally more sympathetic. I'd like to think that that's changed now, but they were generally more sympathetic to Harry and Meghan, says a former palace aide. So Megxit plays directly into what was going on with the Caribbean and some of the stuff that they were accusing the royal family of, right? The ist words that Harry and Meghan like to throw around with, nothing to back it up, that sort of thing. So that's interesting. But it goes into explain. He points that out to explain this is what played a part in some of the moves that the king's Caribbean realms have been making in an attempt to sever the royal constitutional link. So that's interesting to me, especially on the heels of this awful Jamaica trip that those two made, talking about Harry and Meghan and that, that whole thing. All right, let's continue on to chapter 17. Chapter 17 is called The Future and the Force. Now, this is what I found interesting about this. It talks about the Ascension Day, and what that's the day, the anniversary of ascending to the throne. So it means that like the day that the queen passed, that sort of thing. So this chapter right off the bat kicks off. I just want to read this one section to you because I thought it was particularly interesting. Again, if you're reading along with me, I'm on page 363. Charles was never going to be anywhere else on the 8th of September 2023, just as Elizabeth II always liked to spend the anniversary of her accession quietly at Sandringham, the place where her father had passed in the early hours of the 6th of February 1952. The king is making his own accession day at Balmoral. He has released a short message recalling the late Queen's long life, devoted service, and all she has meant to so many of us, along with a beautiful and hitherto unpublished 1968 photograph of Elizabeth II in full garter robes, but looking faintly amused by something going on just behind the photographer. Here's the photograph. I love it so much. She looks so beautiful. I just want to take a moment and show you this. I just thought that was a great way to kick off this chapter. I love learning. I just love learning details about Queen Elizabeth. I love seeing the photos like this. It just makes my heart so happy. All right, let's keep going. All right, so continuing on, again, we're still in chapter 17, The Future and the Force. I thought this one was pretty great because I enjoy getting to know, the author goes more into how William does things, Prince William versus King Charles. And again, this is another thing that I love learning about, how Prince William operates. So there's a highlight for me on hold on, I'm getting the page for you, page 368. And it goes into how Prince William gets most of his news from online sources like BBC and briefings from his staff. He prefers more bullet point memos, it sounds like, to big bundles of documents. He prefers to talk through agendas with trusted advisors. He likes to turn to different leaders, like they point to specifically former Tory leader Lord Hague, who now chairs the Royal Foundation of the Prince and Princesses of Wales, as well as the former British ambassador to the USA, Sir David Manning, and Simon Case, the cabinet secretary. Remember, these are people that Harry talks such shit about in his book, I remember that, who previously worked as the prince's private secretary. On major constitutional and international issues, he will talk and defer to his father. Otherwise, he remains his own man. He's got his own agency. He really feels that. He likes to... The author goes in, he takes his own decisions. Author goes on to describe Prince William as a functional decision maker and very intuitive. He's good at making judgment calls. He's confident in his own judgment. If there's an important decision, he'll normally ask 3 or 4 people, praised as that being an excellent trait because he is willing to listen to others, a skill that his brother never got. William's instincts have served him well, with a preference for thoughtful, long-term engagement on a few carefully chosen fronts, like his father and his grandfather, Prince Philip, before him. He's already made his own significant mark on the world's environmental stage with his Earthshot Prize. I personally love that. I love following the Earthshot Prizes. I love seeing the photos, the events, the things leading up to it. I find it all so interesting. Sometimes described as a Nobel Prize for the Environment, it was launched by Prince William and Sir David Attenborough in 2020 with a £50 million prize fund and a mission to inject some positivity into the frequently doom-laden climate debate. Each year until 2030, 5 winners from anywhere in the world will receive £1 million every year for groundbreaking work in 5 categories, including clean our air and revive our oceans. By any measure, it is a substantial example of royal soft power. Again, I personally think it's a great cause. I think it's a great way to inspire people, and it's a brilliant initiative. I mean, good for him and David Attenborough. I think that's really cool. There's one other part of this chapter I'd like to go into, and it talks about the differences of how King Charles operates versus how William operates. And they go into King Charles operates his private office along with the same lines of that of Her Majesty the late Queen, with a private secretary delegating downwards. The Prince and Princess of Wales have been developing a more lateral command structure at their Kensington Palace headquarters. The idea is to engender greater collective responsibility, strengthen the structure, and avoid a single point of failure. Previously, the Prince's right-hand man had been his private secretary. Most recently, I hope I say this, is it Jean-Christopher Grey? A high-flying civil servant. Grey had previously worked for 3 chancellors, the Exchequer, and a prime minister, David Cameron. He had arrived on loan from Whitehall. Anyway, it goes into that. I find it interesting to see the difference of how William operates, and Catherine as well, it sounds like, and how they're changing things a little bit, and versus how Her Majesty the late Queen and King Charles operates. While this is about King Charles and William, Prince of Wales, I can't help but think, oh, this sounds completely different to Hank and Skank, who are busy making people cry at their desks. Tell me you remember this. I bring it up as often as I can. This is a great place to bring it up. Harry talked about some of his assistants crying at his and Meghan's assistants crying at their desks. And he chalked it up in Spare as they were upset because of the rift between the Fab Four. No, they were not. It was not that. It's because you two, talking about Harry and Meghan, are awful people. And of course you'd make it where, oh, they're crying about your whatever rift, and not because you two are treating them terribly. Oh, but don't worry, guys. Remember the story was that Meghan got them an ice cream truck. Do you remember this? I'm thinking again, these are grown-ups, right? And probably instead of an ice cream truck, they wanted to be treated, I don't know, nicely, kindly, fairly, not thrown tea at, allegedly, all that stuff. That's where my brain goes when I read stuff like this. I say all that to make the comparison and to remind everybody that a lot of the people that left Harry and Meghan, all those people that quit, who could blame them, William and Catherine ended up taking on a lot of those people. Not all of them, but a lot of them went to work with William and Catherine afterwards. So can you imagine from crying at your desk because you have the world's 2 suckiest bosses, I don't know, and then going to work with William and Catherine where you can actually be heard and be part of the conversation and listen to, and it's not like a delegation all the time. It's a, hey, your thoughts are important too. Let's discuss this. What a change. What a difference. Oh, goodness gracious. All right, let's continue on. And finally, we get into chapter 18, Virtues for All Seasons. So this chapter kicks off with again, reiterating the love between King Charles and Queen Camilla, and how much joy she seems to have brought to his life, and how even her sister goes into, they're kind of opposites on paper, but they just work so well together that she truly makes him laugh, and they found happiness, they remain active, all that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed reading that part. One of the parts that I want to call your attention to, page 384 in my copy of the book, so it'll be around there for you, is it goes into the Princess Royal, Princess Anne, one of my personal favorites. So I want to talk about this. So her key role in the new reign is, he brings up, you can see it in the coronation photographs as proof of her ongoing support and, again, her key role with him. So while the king has the queen to his left, it's Anne, Princess Royal, who stands to his right side. One of the 3 members of the family who regularly performs investitures along with the king and the Prince of Wales. Princess Anne has also been added to the roster of senior royal mourners. So what that means is she can attend important world funerals if the Prince of Wales is unable to be there. And they said this occurred when the ex-king Constantine I hope I say this, Hellenis, passed away in January 2023, and so she stepped into that role. Couldn't agree more. Love Princess Anne so much. I think it's wonderful. I mean, of course she stepped up. She always does, right? And now, in real time, as these health issues have arisen for both King Charles and for Catherine, Princess of Wales, we're hearing more and more how she has continued to step up. But I don't even know if step up is the right word. That's what they're saying. I'm saying she's always there. Always, it sounds like. Always continuously called one of the hardest working royals, and it shows. And I love her. And she waved to me, so obviously we're best friends. I've told that story a million times. When I went to Coronation, she was one of the ones I was dying to see, and within a few hours of being in London, I just feel so lucky I was able to see King Charles and Princess Anne. And that was so cool. So obviously we're best friends. All right, continuing on. Let's see. Let's talk those two. Not the two on screen. I meant Harry and Meghan. All right. One of the last mentions of, there's more Harry, but Harry and Meghan in general was found on page 390, where it goes into, it was more of how King Charles handles situations like Harry and Meghan, as well as Andrew and that whole situation. So he explains that basically those dukes are likely not to go away. In both cases, the king has decided to keep relations civil and pragmatic rather than confrontational. Now, I'm recording this in the middle of this stupid website going up, and this will air, I'm sure, just a while later. So no telling what's happened. I hope that more stern things have happened. But according to this book, yes, I agree. He tends to keep, in my opinion, it seems like he keeps things civil rather than confrontational. Kind of a frustration I think a lot of us feel with the king. But I understand it's that, keep calm, carry on, never complain, never explain, that sort of thing. All right. So when the husband, Harry, let it be known he was coming to Britain in 2023, September, en route to his Invictus Games in Germany, the king invited him to stay at Balmoral. Well, when Harry's Invictus commitments ruled out a trip to Scotland, he was, according to royal officials, offered royal accommodation at Windsor. It was later reported that he had asked for a room at the castle and that his request was rejected because he had not given adequate notice. Not so, says Robert Hardman. That's not the case. They lied about something else. Do you remember the story coming out? Because I do. I'd heard the same thing. Anyway, Robert Hardman says, no, that's not what happened. Windsor Skeleton summer staff did indeed offer Harry somewhere to stay, but by the time this had been arranged, Harry had already booked a hotel. No one was snubbing anyone, says a member of staff, but again, Harry always has to play the victim. Right, and then the last thing I want to discuss in this chapter, it wraps up just the good things that King Charles has been up to and implemented since being king. And it goes into, I'm on page, 394. And it goes into his 75th birthday, November 2023. He devised his own present to himself. He was well aware that the public's appetite for royal spectacles had been thoroughly sated after a jubilee, a state funeral, and a coronation in the space of a year. Instead, he wanted to celebrate with a new initiative to combat food waste. He called it the Coronation Food Project. It aims to produce 200 million meals a year. Let me try that again. It aims to produce 200 million meals a year for vulnerable people. It'd be launched with a single royal birthday photo shoot, bypassing the usual candidates, either a glossy, such as Country Life or national newspaper. The exclusive went to the street magazine, The Big Issue. I think that's so great. I think that is a wonderful cause and a wonderful initiative, and I do give King Charles the credit for doing this. That's amazing. I mean, what a great cause. Again, aims to produce 200 million meals a year for vulnerable people and combat food waste. That's awesome. So again, it's a great great thing, great cause. And I love that, that's some of the wonderfulness coming out of King Charles's reign. I think that's great. And I think that's going to wrap up this book. The book concludes, and yeah, I really enjoyed it. I'm dying to know your thoughts on this. I mean, I'll be totally honest with you. This author can't stand Harry and Meghan almost as much as we can't. He definitely lays into them. I think what was it, chapter? It was that Headwinds chapter that we read. That it's probably the best. So if you're looking for juicy, I wish there was more juicy parts like that. If you just are over Harry and Meghan, you don't really care about that stuff. I get it completely. If you're just looking for a good read about King Charles and how he's doing things, then I would say this one's pretty great. I really did enjoy it. I had expected I would just skip to the Harry and Meghan parts, but I ended up reading the whole thing, and I did. I found myself enjoying it. There are some tedious bits. I had read that beforehand, and I kind of experienced that, and I'm very honest about that. I believe it was around, oh gosh, now I'm confused. Maybe chapter 4, something like, I might have it wrong, about the coronation seating and the logistics and stuff. I just found that a little bit okay, that's a lot of information, but otherwise a good read. If you're into audiobooks, he does narrate the book himself, and yeah, I enjoyed this one. I read this one on Kindle. I know a lot of people were having trouble getting copies of this book. Again, I got mine on Kindle. I've had others say they got theirs on Audible. So hopefully you're able to find a copy if that's something you were interested in reading. Now, I will put this all together and do one final super cut with all the, all my recaps together. If you're so inclined and want to listen to, I don't know, a couple hours of me talking about this book, please, by all means, I'll run that soon. Check that out. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it here. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for reading along with me and for all your lovely comments along the way. Let me know if you read this book or if you're thinking about reading this book. Let me know your thoughts. And hey, if there's another book you want to cover, please leave that in the comments as well. I like to take breaks in between the books that I recap because it is so much work going through and making notes and all this stuff, but I'm happy to do it. So if there's another book, I'm looking for a juicy book. I want another revenge type book. I mentioned in another video, I started Brothers and Wives, but I was so disappointed because it was kind of it wasn't pro Harry and Meghan, but it sure wasn't anti Harry and Meghan. I was like, ugh, I didn't love it. So like I said, I read a little bit of it and I got so turned off, I closed the book. I haven't opened since. So I'm looking for a juicy one. If there's one that you want to read, if there's one you can think of that's like revenge or one of those, please, or even Courteous, that was really good as well. Let me know in the comments. I welcome it. And as always, thank you guys so much for being here, for all your love and support. I miss Her Majesty the late Queen. Seeing these pictures makes me miss her so much. But yeah, I hope you have the best day, and I will talk to you guys again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.